So this is the story of Daniel, an American professor living in the wilds of Ireland, and he's married to a reclusive ex-film star. And he makes a discovery about a woman he knew 20 years ago, and this information is enough to send him off course, far from home and far from Claudette and his family. It's a novel very much about leaving and arriving and about what it means to belong to a place or a person, but most of all it's a portrait of a marriage, the forces that hold it together and the pressures that drive it apart. Well, I'd had this idea of writing a novel about a woman who drops out of life, who has had quite a lot of fame quite quickly and hates it, and so just becomes a recluse. But I couldn't, it was a story I couldn't quite find the right angle or the right way in. And then one day I just had this idea that what should happen is that somebody, a man, should come across her in the middle of nowhere and have no idea who she is. And she's so surprised by this that they start to form a relationship. So that's kind of how Daniel came to be. He suddenly seemed to be the key into the story that I wanted to write, the idea of a man who's very sociable but is slightly oblivious. So he kind of comes across her and doesn't quite clock what the situation is. I realised because Claudette walks out on her life that she would leave an awful lot of stuff behind. She just walked out one day with a tiny backpack and her son. So everything from her life, every possession, every item of clothing, every letter that makes up the fabric of her life is left behind. And I was interested in the idea about the story that objects can tell about you, that they have their own narrative, the things that you live with and live among. And also I have a friend who's an auctioneer, and he sometimes tells me about the things he's auctioning, and I never really understood the kind of draw for people to spend huge amounts of money on things that belong to famous people. I never really got it. It always slightly baffled me. And then one day he said, "I've got a letter by Charlotte Bronte. Do you want to see it?" And of course Charlotte Bronte is a huge heroine of mine. And so he did. He let me hold it, and I could run my finger along the line of the ink that she had written. And it was only then that I could understand that kind of thrill. And I think it's all about fingerprints, it's all about touch. You get to touch something that these people touched. It's that kind of collapsing down of distance and your life and theirs. So it was only then that I realised the reason, I realised the kind of thrill of it. I had already written Claudette's disappearance in a different location, and the scene wasn't quite working. I couldn't really find out why. It didn't seem convincing. It wasn't quite there. And anyway, I was staying in this very remote island in Sweden, and my daughter, who was a baby at the time, she, for some reason, I don't know why, but in Sweden she woke up every day at 5 a.m. It's like a Swedish sort of jet lag or something. And so I was out with her in this tiny island, pushing her around in her pushchair at 5 o'clock in the morning, trying to get her to go back to sleep. And she finally did, and I parked her on this little tiny beach, and I went for a swim. And it wasn't even dawn, the sun was just coming up, and I was swimming along, and it was in the middle of nowhere in this totally silent archipelago, and I was swimming, and I suddenly thought, this is where you disappear.